Hello, everybody. You're listening to Wake Up with Patti Catter, and today I have Pat Miletich on the show. Pat, welcome back to the show. It's your second time on, and I'm really happy that you're back.
Well, Patty, I'm happy that you enjoyed our first conversation enough to even invite me back. So,
Absolutely. You are an amazing guest, and I think that we're talking about some things that my listeners really need to hear. For those of my listeners who didn't catch the last show, could you just kind of catch us up to speed on some things?
sure. And, just for instance, my background was one of being sick my entire childhood with respiratory illness and figuring that out on my own because doctors were not able to do it. So I wanted to be great at athletics. So at the age of 19 or 20, I started to do a lot of research, solve the problem myself, put some organic substances into my body that I felt would remedy the problems. And it only took about 10 days to figure that out, which then I kept researching, of course, to put those same inputs plus others into my athletes, which resulted in it wasn't by my power, it was by our creator, by nature, and just getting the downloads of what I needed to look for. But ultimately, that created 95 pay-per-view athletes, 12 world champions. And then I was able to work with a lot of very high-level military folks, create better human beings that were capable of operating in extreme conditions, high altitudes, under duress, and being able to recover and come back the next day and do it all over again if they had to. So that's really where my expertise started. I got into soil about 28 years ago, and put eventually the pieces of the puzzle all fit together, and you realize that we're one big organism. The earth is just one big organism, and we happen to be crawling around on it, and that we need the exact same thing that the soil needs, that the plants need, that the honeybees need. It's really the same thing in terms of carbon bonded nutrients in biology. And it's
Mhm.
not, go ahead.
Yeah, so some of my listeners might not know a little bit about your history. Let's dive into that just a tad bit more because it's really interesting, and I don't want my listeners to miss out on some of the things that you did when you're talking about working with athletes or military. Can you kind of explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. And again, it was all driven by my desire to be great at athletics. I came from a Bettendorf, Iowa, 35,000 person community in Eastern Iowa that was great at athletics. I had a lot of childhood heroes out of that town. And I also wanted to be like them, of course. So by by winning a world title because of solving my own health issues, I proved, I guess, to myself that I can take a very sick person who's not capable of doing any of those things, and by changing, what went into the body and altering things at a very fast rate, that anyone on the earth, given certain limitations, of course, is capable of becoming a superhuman, right? So winning a world title and holding the world title for 3.5 years was just me proving to myself that I was capable of doing this, and then doing that, repeating that proof of concept is what I call it. My business partner, Will Spencer, who's an absolute genius in agriculture to human health. He's a homeopathic doctor, expert in animal husbandry, soil health, all the above. His proof of concept is, increasing yields for farmers and not using any chemicals to do it, to show that he can grow, large crops without any pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides because the plants have their own immune system, because they've been given the real biology and the real nutrients, things like that. But so yeah, I've got quite a diverse background and research in different areas that led me to this path that, ultimately we have all the solutions that were given to us through nature. It's just a matter of understanding the combinations and how things need to be put together to do that, and that you don't need to patent chemicals to do it and still be able to make a living. That's, what we're offering to all those folks in that world. So.
Mhm. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to me. I remember growing up, my grandma had a huge garden and I'd help her in the garden, and she always bragged about how she never used pesticides. They were just, I don't know what year they came out, but it seemed like they just started getting popular when I was a kid. You'd see those Miracle Grow commercials and
Mhm.
whatnot. When was it that you really, I know you mentioned you're 19 years old, that you really started diving into it, but do you remember the first time you really heard about chemicals? Was it that time of your life or before
It was
that?
actually quite a bit before that, in the 70s when it tells you how old I am. when I was a little kid down on the farms in southern Iowa, both sides of my family were farmers. Some of them were coal miners in southern Iowa as well. And there were a lot of health issues. When the Green Revolution or the chemical explosion happened in agriculture, the petroleum-based fertilizers and synthetic, the pesticides and then the failed antibiotics, the herbicides and fungicides started to be prevalently used in mass. That's when a lot of my relatives, older relatives, started having, health issues. There was a lot of cancer. There was a lot of Parkinson's disease illnesses that were happening, nervous system dysfunction, things like that from the chemicals that they were working with. And so that registered with me, that's imprinted on my brain, and certainly was probably part of my respiratory problems, so. But also in the 90s, working with children, I was teaching children a lot back then in martial arts, and parents would bring these boys to me all of a sudden that had this thing called autism. And I said, I would always ask, the way I'm wired is I don't just accept why something's happening. I have to figure out why it's happening. And then there has to be a solution, right? That's how we're supposed to think. And so I would ask the parents, well, what are the doctors saying is causing this? They don't know. Well, what are they doing for the child? Well, they're prescribing medications. Well, what's the name of the medication? What is it? And I would get the names, and then I would research what those were and find out those, molecularly not that far off from methamphetamines. And this is, being prescribed to 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. And I thought back in the 90s, we are in for a lot of trouble here if this continues. Then getting closer to the year 2000, end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, I had athletes coming to me from all over the world, and they would go to our grocery store because they were spending 2 to 4 to 8 weeks with us to train with our team. Because at the time, of course, we had the best team in the world. And they would get back from the grocery store for evening practice, and they'd say, there's nothing in your grocery stores that we can even eat. Everything in there is poison. And, I was already keenly aware of this, but hearing fighters from other nations that we were under attack with our food system, really brought it all into focus for me. So that's been something that has stuck with me. All of those registering moments have really woke me up more and more and more, really.
Isn't it something that a lot of countries do not even allow some of the chemicals in their food that we do in our food? And do you have a reason for that?
Well, I mean, look, if I were to think in terms of the people that or entities that run this world, if they were to keep us under control, they would want us sick, they would want us obese, they would want us in fear, easily to manipulate, easy to send out messages via media and tell everyone to lock themselves in their houses and put masks on and stay 6 feet apart, for instance. If you were to try that, for instance, in the 70s when everybody was in shape and had a six-pack, everybody would have laughed them, everybody would have turned their TV off and went outside and played and done their thing, right? It's only because you've got a very sick population that they will actually follow that, right? So I think that there's a lot of monetary gain for certain people in this population to continue with these programs that have been built. But I think that they're also waking up. We're seeing a lot of people come over from the chemical ag side, from the allopathic medical side, realizing that the detriment that's happening to mankind if this continues down this path. So that's a beautiful thing that's happening, is a lot of folks are really starting to jump ship.
Absolutely. When COVID first started out, and I hope I don't get banned for that. I have been shadow banned for saying that word, and it just slipped right out of my mouth. But when that happened, I was more overweight. And I remember thinking that if I had to choose between taking what I thought was a vaccination versus just getting healthy, my obvious choice was like, let me get healthy. The funny thing that I've noticed over time is those who were masking up or afraid of COVID because of their health, because they were obese, because they had issues from being obese, many of them stayed the same and opted to continue to wear a mask or opted to continue to think that a vaccine would protect them. But we all have been told numerous times that the more healthy you are, the least affected you're going to be by it. So that has been really surprising to me, that more people are not trying to get healthy just for that alone.
Yeah, and well, the key to all of this is the linchpin is people understanding this, is that the environment, and this is Steve Moore's quote, and I use it all the time, Steve Moore's one of our partners and a genius who's done this all over the world, that environment always dictates genetic expression. So it doesn't matter. We are a direct reflection of the environment, our health. And so when I look at Americans for the past, minimum 30 years, when I knew we were already in a national security crisis due to, human health in America, that the environment and the toxification of the environment is directly reflected in the population. And so we look at the mental, hormonal, physical illnesses that are taking place around us. All you have to do is just go to a grocery store and just stand and watch people go by. And we can observe the illnesses. We can see 35-year-olds in hover rounds. We can, see all the increase in the handicap parking spaces, all of this. So what do? Do we fix the environment first, or do we fix the people first? So we have to educate and open people's minds up to the understanding that you were not born imperfect. There may have been some genetic mutations that you were born with because you were a detox pathway for your mother who was full of toxins. But the DNA damage that took place due to synthetics and heavy metals in the environment that came from your mother potentially can also be reversed. So DNA repair does take place when you put the right substances into your body and the right biology. That mitochondrial function, cellular function, gut health, all those things do fall back into place actually in a pretty fast, rapid rate when you understand this. So do I make the decision to break free from the system and put things into my body that are going to clean the heavy metals and synthetics out and replace them with high-grade nutrients? Or am I going to go to a medical professional, quote unquote, and get a prescription for more synthetic chemicals and heavy metals, because that's what's prevalent in those pills. So, the decision is the American public's, really, and it comes down to educating them and giving them a choice that there are solutions that you can turn your health around in a fairly quick manner. And in the meantime, we're doing the same thing for soil. There's farmers all over the country asking us for assistance. There's all kinds of soil around the country that has been toxified, whether it was biosolids being spread from the compost facilities, the county compost facilities, whether it's seed mash from ethanol plants that were used for fertility, whatever it is, and however the environment has gotten into people, we can correct it all.
Yeah, people don't really realize that the place that their food comes from is really important, right?
Yeah, yeah. And well, when you go to, the produce section of your grocery store and you're buying bananas and avocados and things like that, well, just looking at the sticker, which I'm sure you've educated your listeners, what that number starts with, that hashtag and the number, the PLU number, if it doesn't start with a 9, you probably don't want to put it into your body. And now even the 9s are questionable because they are using pesticides with quite a few organic products, right? So it's not what you eat is what you are. It is what your food eats is what you are. So the inputs that went into the soil to grow those avocados, well, what were those inputs? Were they real, or were they synthetic, make-believe, bonded nutrients that are detrimental to health, right? So that the choice is theirs. And I just tell people it's simple. Walk up to the produce manager and say, I want organic avocados. I want organic bananas. I want organic celery. I'm not going to eat this stuff. I'm not going to buy it, So we have to vote with our dollars a little bit here.
Now, with that, I have a question for you. So, some of the grocery stores that say that they're organic foods, does that mean a whole lot still? I mean, is that still an okay thing? Because I know that some farmers might plant their food in some quote unquote organic soil, but maybe they didn't know, 20 years before they lived there that there was something in the soil that was really bad.
It's meaning less and less. I will say that. That's something that people have to be aware of. Growing your own food is actually fun. Having a beautiful garden is actually fun. Is it a little bit of work? Sure, it's a little bit of work. But, do research, watch YouTube videos, educate yourself on what you need to put into your soil to grow amazing gardens. And it's actually fun. And harvesting your own vegetables and fruit and having an orchard instead of, trees that don't produce fruit, instead of bushes that don't produce berries. Grow a food forest. Jim Gale and Food Forest Abundance and the Council of 12 that I work with are doing amazing and making amazing inroads into educating people to change their landscaping, and the landscaping companies around the country are just starting to catch on to this and realizing, hey, we better make some adjustments because the people are going to start wanting edible landscapes instead of, just ornamental, decorative, useless bushes, right?
Mhm.
And that's the whole idea of victory gardens during World War II. Everyone was growing their own food because otherwise you weren't going to eat.
Right. It's kind of funny because for a period of time, we all wanted to do better than our grandparents did. And I think we all still want to do better than they did financially or whatnot. However, a lot of things it feels like we've regressed a bit, whether it's not growing our own food, spending time with family the way that they used to. I mean, I could name a whole lot of things. I think food resonates with me the most. My grandma always made really great homemade food. Everything was homegrown, and I miss that. So I noticed that there are some cities that are starting the gardens in their cities too. That's really neat to see. What is it that you would tell my listeners right now if they needed to look for something specific? You had mentioned the codes at the grocery store, trying to buy organic. What can they do at home to kind of advocate for healthier soil?
Well, ultimately, our website's being rebuilt right now in Environautics, but we offer 0 to 5 acre box, 5 to 10 acre, 10 to 20, and 20 to 40 acre boxes for people to use those products to remediate and transmute all synthetic chemicals and heavy metals in their soil. For the people out there that, I was frowned upon in my homeowners association. I lived amongst John Deere executives and orthopedic surgeons and folks like that. And they sent out an email because I didn't use anything in my yard. And I had dandelions and whatever else growing. You can imagine with $1 million houses around it. So they sent an email to me, but it was to everybody. We noticed that there's some yards in the neighborhood that are, growing weeds and things like that. And I just sent back an email to everybody and said, I'm really alarmed by the use, the widespread use of harmful chemicals, warfare chemicals, and failed antibiotics in everyone's yards here. We've got children. I'm concerned about my children's health, and that's what really should be important to us. And they knew to tiptoe around me after that because of what was going on. But I would just say, take control of your homeowners association. Say, listen, let's start growing food. Let's stop using chemicals in our neighborhood. You know, I'll be honest with you, seeing dandelions grow across the 12 acres of our yard and the farm here and seeing the bees everywhere and hearing the entire property hums with bees in the summer and the spring. And even right now in North Dakota, when it's November, the bees are still out and they're very active. It's beautiful. The birds are out after applying the products that we advise people to use. This went from a farm that was owned by a guy that used chemicals and there was no life here. Now all the wildlife comes here. Thousands of birds, hawks everywhere, eagles everywhere. There's herds of deer. There's salamanders everywhere in the garden. It's just full of life because animals tune into frequency and nutrients, and that's why they've all collected here from all around the region. So if you want vitality and life and beautiful things to happen for your family and your neighborhood, be the change you want to see in the world and do it to your own neighborhood. So that's what I would say.
Mhm. Absolutely. So when your website's up and running, could you go ahead and share that with us?
Absolutely, yeah. And then I don't know if you want me to share any products that people could use for their bodies. And
Absolutely.
I need to get you products as well. So people can go to mineralking.life and so we've got just the human regeneration kit on there right now. The 100 plus microbes, which are probiotics, which they're known by now, but they're not genetically modified. They are the soil-borne microorganisms that we used to get from our food that are essential for function of certainly digestive, but entire systems of the body. The fulvic acid, which most people are using a shilajit, which is not as bioactive or bio ready. This comes from the most nutrient-rich peat bog found in the world, and it's 77 colloid minerals, which means carbon bonded. So all of the so-called metals that you're supposed to have, the zincs and the magnesiums and all those types of things, there's a tough time in modern science differentiating between oxygen bonded and carbon bonded nutrients, right? So these are all colloidal, and that means beneficial vitality giving nutrients to mitochondria, cellular function. Antioxidant properties are incredible for DNA repair, all those things across the board. And then methylene blue is only needed for about a month to basically reset your nervous system and go after any brain and nervous system parasites that people are not aware of. Most seizure-related illnesses with brains and a lot of mental illness are associated with parasites in the brain, microscopic parasites, and people aren't aware of that. So we want to be able to eradicate those for people to help them with their anxiety, depression, and any other issues that they might be dealing with. So
Really interesting because, as you know, I have a lot of veterans who listen to my show, and many of them have been deployed multiple times. If you
sure.
know, that's a really interesting topic to me to
Yeah,
hear
and we're
about.
yeah, and that's veterans and active duty folks. I've got a nephew that's active duty, and for a lot of the folks that are active who were mandated to get the treatments in 2021 have suffered some pretty severe side effects. We'll just say
Mhm.
the key is cleaning the technology, the heavy metals, synthetics out of the body, and replacing them instantly with very high grade carbon bonded nutrients. And then health tends to go the other direction. And that's really
Mhm.
the key. We do not acknowledge, do not recognize that disease exists. It does not exist. It is always the environment getting into us that's causing the malfunction of the organisms, right? So we don't heal any of those things because they don't exist. We don't recognize them. We just allow the organism to function correctly in a biological sense.
So, on these prescriptions, and I shouldn't say prescriptions because they're not from a doctor, but on these different types of
Substances,
treat. Thank
programs.
you. Thank you. Do you have the instructions? Because the one that you mentioned, you say, you only take it for a month. I'm sure these things must come with the instructions,
Yeah.
correct?
Yes, yes, yes. And that, for instance, a lot of world-class athletes use these products, the Mineral King fulvic acid, and then the 100 plus microbes, the probiotics, are something that they will be on till the day they die, because these are the nutrients and the biology that we used to get from our food to remain healthy. When they tell you, for instance, that people only live to 40 or 50 years old 200 years ago is false, and they're starting to realize it's false because when they inspect the bones, they look like they're in the condition of a 40 to 50-year-old. Well, those people were 120 years old and their bones looked like the bones of a 40-year-old because the nutrients were very rich in the soil. There were no synthetic chemicals and all of those things. So people have to understand they're figuring out that things aren't always as they seem. But nonetheless, yeah, the fulvic acid and the 100 plus is something that people want to use. I'm going to use certainly till the day I die. My children, all three of my children, use those products every day and have for the past 6 7 years. So
It's amazing. Patrick, thank you so much for being on the show today. And if you're listening, please make sure that you go over to the websites. I'll let you know when they're working. Pat, if you can let me know when they're working so I can let my listeners know. And I appreciate you so much. And I really think that health is a big, important issue. I loved recently how I heard one of the politicians mentioning how let's make America healthy again. I do absolutely agree with that.
yeah, and it's actually a lot simpler than people realize. It really is.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Until next time, head back over to my archives. Catch the first show with Pat if you haven't done so already. I'll be sure to also link that one because it's fantastic. It has his entire background, and he is a badass. You are amazing.
I'm just a big kid walking around trying to heal other kids. That's all.
You're amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.